Hello and good evening. Welcome to Faith with Under Fives, a conference for those engaging with under fives in faith settings, which we spread out over 3 evenings. This is the middle of those 3 evenings. This conference is sponsored by the United Reformed Church's Children's and Youth Work Department and Roots for Churches. I'm Sam Richards. I'm the head of Children's and Youth Work for the United Reformed Church, and I'll be your host for this evening, internet permitting. It's wonderful to have so many of you here. I realise a few people are still arriving. Please make yourselves at home in your own homes and feel welcome. Lovely to have so many of you here, and we really appreciate you all giving up your time and energy to focus on this really important area of ministry. So tonight our focus is faith with under fives in church worship, particularly thinking about creches and pews in church and more widely under fives in worship. I'm delighted that our keynote speaker this evening is Gill Ambrose. She claims to be retired, most recently having been editor at Roots for a number of years, and before that the children's advisor in Ely Diocese. But her expertise also comes from being a parent and more recently a grandparent. So we're delighted to have her here and look forward to her sharing some wisdom with us later. Just a reminder that this evening's session is being videoed. Only the speakers will appear in the public version that goes up on YouTube. So please do have your cameras on if you feel comfortable to do so, particularly when you're in small groups, because it's much more friendly, obviously, to talk to faces if you're able and comfortable to do that. And please do use the chat function throughout for questions, suggestions, sharing resources. This is very much an opportunity for us all to learn from each other, share experiences, and particularly any things that you've found useful and helpful in your own ministry with children. Without further ado, I'm going to very shortly start with an opening prayer. So if you have your cuddly toy to hand, can I ask that you pick it up now? And we're going to use our toys in our prayer. So I'd like to invite you to stroke your cuddly toy. The psalmist encourages us to taste and see that the Lord is good. But tonight, I invite you to touch and feel that the Lord is good. Thank God for the gift of touch, for how it connects all of us to our surroundings, to the created world, and to each other. Pray especially for all those who are missing touch at this difficult time. And if you feel comfortable to do so, stroke your cuddly toy on your face and even perhaps over your mouth. Touch is how children first experience the world, particularly, as we know, using their mouths as that most sensitive part. Receive God's touch in your life. Amen. So to start our programme this evening, which is going to include keynote speaker, some time in a breakout group, opportunity to put some questions to
So there'll be opportunity to put some questions to our panel of experts, she says, quickly leaping to the rescue there. But first of all, we're going to have an opportunity to see some of our URC practitioners who are going to share with us some of their wisdom.
What's important is that the place is welcoming, welcoming to both children and their carers, stroke parents, whoever brings them along. It's the warmth of the people within it, providing a space that is well thought out with good toys. It doesn't have to be expensive toys. It can be, you know, a little home corner, if you've got children of that age, that's been made from a saucepan that you've got in your cupboard and a wooden spoon. If you know the children, then often it's good to put something that they will enjoy playing with, which would help them to settle. I was very inspired by a family that used to come to one of the churches that we were at, and Granny brought them every week, and the children came in with a little bag of books and colouring, and they would sit in the pew, and although they were listening at the same time, they were doing, but all the things in those bags were Bible story books, or colouring that was Bible story. And she said they have the others, you know, other stories every day of the week. And so one church that we were in, we put busy bags at the end of each pew, just a couple of books and some colouring. It's not easy for adults to sit still.
That's true.
Why should we expect a child to do it? But some will fully engage. But for those that can't, something on hand is always useful.
That when we talk about all age worship, we mean all ages.
Mm-hmm.
It's not another name for a children's service where we just dumb everything down and hope the adults don't mind. Mm. We always try to make sure that our songs that we're choosing for a beginning or end of service or wherever, that they are either songs that the children definitely know, if they're kind of the more adulty ones, or even if we're including action songs, or sometimes it's a song that we've literally just, I've done very basic Makaton to the chorus, you know, so that children have something to learn and copy, and, you know, so we just try to make sure that there's enough for people to do. One thing that we've also tried to do is make sure that there are things to do, like paper and some pens and bits and bobs at the back.
For a lot of children, big old churches with a loud organ can be quite overpowering. We've got a wigwam, just a plain fabric wigwam that's in a corner in church, at the front of the church, and children go in there, and within that they find a calm, small space. And I've put little books in there. There are Bible story books, but there's also something that I set up on a little tray, and it relates to what the Bible reading for that day is, or what the Bible story is.
Is reassuring parents that it's okay when we're coming for the time of worship. It's okay that their 2-year-old is running around the church, because their concept of church when they were growing up wasn't like that. It was you had to be quiet, you had to be silent, etc. And now we're trying to give a different message. It's okay to run around. It's okay to make some noise.
Difficult for children if adults' expectations of them are not realistic. Perhaps it is lack of preparation. I think where they're not taken into account is a problem, and also when they're put on the spot. That's a problem for me. You know, when people expect children to answer them, well, children have as much right not to speak in church as adults do. You know, expecting children and adults to listen for too long.
Is that it's not so much about the children, because children come in and they kind of just accept newness as a great thing. It's about how we educate's a strong word, how we encourage and have a relationship with those parents and the families as a whole. That's what changes it for them, and whether they want to come back. Because actually, you know, trying to make it so that it's just children friendly isn't okay, because actually children love it. You know, children engage in most things. Children are so accepting and so open, but it's about helping families to feel that and feel welcome in a way.
I'm delighted now to be able to introduce Gill Ambrose, who is going to do the first of 2 sessions for us.
So it's really good to be with you, with so many people. And so we're going to look at children in church. And I think I want to pay tribute actually to a URC minister, the Reverend John Sutcliffe, who a long time ago possibly first coined the term all age worship. He was the minister of a church in St Albans, and I remember going to a lecture that he gave where he commended all age worship, which happened in his church every week in the round. And he said pretty well, if you don't do this, you're finished. And the audience was horrified. But I think in many ways, he was saying something that really mattered. And it hit me like a bullet in the chest, really, and changed the way I thought of everything. So I want to attribute a great deal of what I say to him. And I will quote from a book that he was very involved in writing. Okay, so, oh dear, how do we go down? Ah, there we go. So let's think about an under 5, and this is a little boy, let's call him Toby. And this is his world. He's spotted something and it is a great fascination. And play is his world. So he looks and he copies and he plays with what he sees. Play is his work. It's what he needs to do. It's what he does most of the time. And he needs people to play with him. And wherever he is, the whole community needs to engage with him if he wants to engage with them. It's what we heard to begin with about the congregation, the community really matter. They matter to him. He doesn't realise that he's a child among a whole lot of people who think the church is theirs. He's just a person who's there and he wants to engage, but it's through play that he will engage. So listen to this. This is from a wonderful book called To Dance with God. Some years ago, I spent an afternoon caught up with a piece of sewing. The wastebasket was filled with scraps of fabric, which were a fascination to my daughter, who was then not yet 4 years old. She collected some long, bright strips and went off. When I checked on her, she was in the garden, sitting on the grass with a long pole to which she was attaching the bright strips of fabric with great lumps of sticky tape. I'm making a banner for a procession, she said. I need a procession so that God will come down and dance with us. Here's a wonderful picture of a child at play, working out their experience of worship. Now, people have studied and written about this. And so from the child dancing in the garden, let's just do a bit of theory. And this is from a book called How Faith Grows. You can still get it on Amazon as a second-hand copy, and it's worth a look. So first of all, we think about really tiny children, babies, and those in their first, well, I'll say couple of years of life. And we think about them as having something that is described as primal faith. This lovely sentence, we're loved into knowing and feeling as we're loved into being. So for this child, Life is chaotic and intuitive, and that is how their faith is. Her ultimate environment is composed of a cloud made up of a collage of images and beliefs derived from her own imagination, from stories, and from her first experience of the outside world. But for the child who is involved in the church in worship, the powerful symbols of Christian liturgy and belonging will contribute deep and lasting images. Young children who are excluded from worship because they don't yet understand may be being cut off from a vital form of nourishment. So having children in the church, among a congregation, among the people of faith, is really important. And the impact of this on their faith is the responsibility of the whole congregation. So let's have a look at something from the Roots resources. And this is from the adult and all age resources. It's not from the Children and Young People magazine. And the examples I've used have all come from the January-February issue of Roots. So this is Epiphany 2. The theme is Come, See and Hear, and the reading is John 1. So here's a gathering exercise. And if we're going to gather for worship, and we're going to have everybody present, then we have to have little people as well as big people, articulate people as well as less articulate people. So here's a gathering activity. It was very noisy at the dinner table. So the youngest child took a spoon, rapped loudly on the table and said, "Everyone speak up one at a time, and me first." Someone has come up with an idea that could involve everybody. So here's the suggestion for the activity. Most people like to be listened to, so form small groups and ask each person in turn to say their name and their favourite colour. Now you can do that by the time you have language at, well, 2.5, possibly younger. And so while this is happening, the instruction says start playing from Joseph's chorus of the amazing colour Dreamcoat about the list of colours. And then ask one person in each group to say aloud the names and favourite colours of everybody. So while they're listening, they have to listen to the music and listen to everybody else speaking and see how they get on. It may be that a little person might do that better than an older person because they focus in a different sort of way. And then ask the speakers if the exercise was easy or hard and why, and so on. So that's a gathering exercise, but it could be done with a really mixed age group, and little people can be as involved in that as everybody else. So inclusion really matters, and we have to be very creative to make sure that we can do that, but it's vital. Let's listen to what Jesus says. People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant, and he said to them, "Let the children come to me, do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it." And he took them up in his arms and laid his hands on them and blessed them. And I love this picture. It's very old. It's German, from one of the Cranach painters. So ancient and yet so tenderly portrayed, but it's very inspiring for us, I think. Jesus says even more powerfully in Matthew's Gospel, when people came to ask him who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, he called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. These are tough words, and we often try and explain them away. But if we don't explain them away, if we take them seriously, then we will revolutionize the way that children's faith can develop and grow. In 1976, almost 50 years ago, the British Council of Churches, as it was then, today it's CTBI, produced a powerful and puzzlingly overlooked report called The Child in the Church. This was another thing that inspired me. Here is its heart. Children are a gift to the church. The Lord of the church sets them in the midst of the church, not as objects of benevolence, but as patterns of discipleship. The church that does not accept children unconditionally into its fellowship is depriving those children of what is rightfully theirs. But the deprivation such a church itself will suffer is far more grave. So if we're to be truly concerned about children and their faith development, then we must put the child in the midst. Children have a place in the pew or on a chair, inside the very church, experiencing worship and praise. There is a place for a creche and for a place where children might do something intensively with someone who will do it for them. But to be in the church, to be on your knee, switching in and out of what happens is really key and critical. The church needs to be a place where their voice can be heard among others, rather like that gathering exercise that we saw. So let's just think for a few seconds about our current predicament. Because as we worship at home, this community support is going to be very hard to access. Screens don't serve fellowship feeling very well, and that's what's really important for these children. And they don't serve young children well. We all know that if we have a family conversation and young children are present, they find it really quite hard with a Zoom call. They switch in and out. They're quite soon distracted. They find it hard to concentrate for that long. So we maybe need not to say we'll include our children in our Zoom worship, but we'll deliberately try to supply alternatives. And that might be where the creche option that I'm going to talk about later is a really helpful suggestion for now. Creche at home might sound a bit odd, but it's probably the best way to address what we can do at the moment. And if that takes up all the time and energy of parents because they can't watch a Zoom worship or take part in Zoom worship and keep tiny children engaged, then maybe we need to think of ways that we can deliver helpful things to these people at this time. And think what might be needed to undertake activities that they can do at home that offer the same sort of worship opportunity. Okay, let's stop there and then we'll think a bit later about some practical examples.
Thank you very much, Gill. That's brilliant, unpacking some of the deep whys and getting into a little bit of the dilemmas of practice in the current context. So the next thing we're going to be doing is sending you into small groups to give you a chance to chew on those riches together and to think about how they might apply to your context. You'll be in the same group again later, so please spend a few moments just introducing yourselves briefly at the start. And then we're also going to ask you to frame one question from your group to put to a panel later. So at the end of your time in the small group, we're going to have about 10 minutes. If you could nominate somebody to, when they come back into the main room, to type that up very quickly into the chat so that we can then think about which are the questions we're able to address in our question and answer session. When you come back, will also be time for a short wiggle break for you. So please feel free to go and get yourselves a drink or stretch or whatever you need to do at that point. And we'll be aiming to reconvene at about 7:45 with our question and answer panel. So please enjoy your time getting to know each other in small groups now.
Yes, I hope you had time to share with one another, and you've certainly come up with some good questions there, and I see there's definitely quite a theme coming through in a lot of places. So I think it's now time for us actually to come to our panel discussions, and it's a real pleasure to be able to greet Gill again, and Jenny and Sue, who are our panel members this evening. So just looking rapidly at the questions that we have here, and having not, are you in, Sam? Sam,
I'm back in. Yes, thank you. Do apologise, everybody, having internet connection problems at my end. So we're going to take 3 questions in particular that seem to sum up quite a lot of the questions that people were asking. So first of all, I'm going to ask Gill and then Sue to comment on how do we address the culture and attitudes that we find in many churches, where people might give lip service to children being welcome, but in reality they don't want children to be seen and heard. They don't like the noise. They don't like the disruption that children being in worship with everybody else entails. So Gill, would you like to go first?
Okay, well, we could take the hard attitude, which was quoted in one of my slides about if we don't include children, then we deprive them. But the deprivation that we will suffer will be far more grave. It's a hard statement. It was a very John Sutcliffe kind of attitude, and I spoke about him at the beginning. I think the other thing to do is that we can't ignore it. So we have to take it and we have to talk about it. And it's an issue for leadership. I mean, sometimes it's a congregation that doesn't like this. Sometimes it's a minister that's uncomfortable with it. So we have to work out where the problem is, I think, and address that. It won't solve itself. And I think at times we need to be quite hard and say, well, if you don't like this, then what is the consequence going to be for us as a community? Answer that question. This is about adults, it's not about children. And I think that's another thing to think of, isn't it? We're talking about children tonight, really. What can we do to help them? But we've inevitably got back to talking about grown-ups.
Thank you, Gill. Sue, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd echo what Gill's just said, and I do think there is an element of leadership. And I think it's about elders taking on board and looking at what is being provided for children within worship and within, generally wider perhaps in the church. We have a kids club, and Tuesday can be church for, Tuesday club can be church for a lot of children who can't make a Sunday. I also think that if there are particular concerns, I think it's also about listening to adults who perhaps struggle with children because they're not used to them. And if there are particular things that are a concern to them, then it's looking at how the church deals with that. It can be a case of, well, you've just got to accept that those children are there. But if they're concerned that children are running around and they are going to run out of the back door, then you put someone near the back door to make sure that children don't do that. You can provide things within the service that help children to engage, children who perhaps for whom it's difficult to listen. So it could be putting the focus in a different place, listening to the concerns of the adults, and actually meeting those concerns by doing some practical things that help children to engage and perhaps them not be noisy and distracting.
Thank you. So the second area that many of the questions seem to home in on was the issue of all age and intergenerational worship, and how we actually make it something that the adults engage in as worship for them and don't just see it as something for the kids. How we make intergenerational and all age worship work for the adults. So I'm going to come to Jenny first for this one.
Thank you, Sam. I think there's something first about preparation. So if you're a worship leader, or if there's the person that is leading worship, or the group of people leading worship, it's something about preparation. So when people come into the church, they can see that there is an expectation that there's going to be something all age, whether it's a table, whether it's some equipment, whatever, so that actually you're setting a scene. So there's a psychological sense in that. In worship, also offering an activity that warning the children about it. So when we're going to hear this reading, for example, we're going to hear this reading, then we're going to do something with it, and then providing an opportunity for the children to start something, and then take it to another part of the church where there's where the table's set up, and encourage all ages to work on it. So would you like to ask some other people in the congregation to help you do this? So you're providing an opportunity for all ages to work together, and I think that really works. And I think one of the things as well is about saying to the adults, putting it in a theological context. What would Jesus have said here? What would Jesus have done here? Because we know what Jesus would have said. Jesus would have said, "You're loved, you're welcome. You know, we're glad to have you here." So I think there's a lot about setting the mindset and subconsciously, visibly setting the scene for them.
Thank you, Jenny. Gill, any thoughts that you would like to add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, it is a hard thing to do, isn't it? And I've been very conscious that when I create an all-age service and lead an all-age service, I work very hard to do it. And the kind of general hymn sandwich or communion service that is done according to a pre-programmed liturgy is much easier to do, actually. So to create all-age worship is difficult, and I think it needs a team of people. It's beyond the capacity of one person week in, week out to do that. But we're here with the Roots resources, and that's what they're for. And they offer things that can genuinely be done with some work in all-age contexts. So you don't have to think it up from scratch constantly and be a wonderful inventor, because those resources have been crafted by people and really thought about, not only in the group that generates them, but then by the writers as they work on the resources at home. And so it's about learning to use what is given to us, but always to sit. I mean, when I write things like this, I sit and I think, so what's it going to be like for this person? What's it going to be like for that person? What will their experience of this be? Will it work for them? And if we have to say it's not going to work for some of them, then we've either got to shift it, or we've got to think of two different things that people can do separately.
Thank you very much, Gill. And I would add on this one that relationship, as in all things with children, young people and adults, really are the key, and that when the adults and children and young people build relationships and know each other, then they have grace for one another, and the children will sit through the dullest hymn because they know it's Ethel's favourite and it reminds her of because she's explained that when the hymn has been sung one time, and the adults will sit through and maybe even join in with an action song, because they know the children love it, and they know that the children find it helpful as a way to connect with God, or that the relationships are real, the conversations are real, the learning, the openness to God becomes multi-directional, not just adults doing things in order to include children, but children doing things in order to include adults. Scripture Union produced a resource called Engage Together, which is another way of doing all-age intergenerational worship, by giving people a variety of ways of responding to the reading, based on learning styles and spiritual styles, not ages. And so you end up with multi-age groups using all sorts of different ways to respond to the reading. And then the important thing is sharing that together. So often a very good question to ask a whole range of different aged people is, where in what we've been doing today have you connected with God? Have you found God? And to help people listen to each other. So we've got a couple more minutes. And one of the other questions we were asked about was how might...
Let's look at the question of how we can help, how we can help our children to feel at home with church until things return to normal. We have a very different situation at the moment where children aren't allowed to go into a creche, aren't allowed to have soft toys or a children's corner, and are sitting on parents' laps, or actually not actually in church at all, and what's provided for them is done by Zoom. So how can we help our children feel at home with church? I'm going to throw that one to Jenny.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. I've just finished in pastorate as a minister, and what we did was we did post-lockdown bags, and we went to a store and we bought calico bags. We named them for every child. We gave them a post-lockdown labelled Bible, and then we put a bunch of stuff in the bag and called that their church bag. We also made sure that we set out family tables for their bubble. So when they came into church, there was a table for the family to sit at, so that they weren't just sat on chairs and falling off mum's knee or wandering around. And so it immediately said, "You're welcome back. It's lovely to see you here." And they immediately know that there is that they are as valued as everybody else in the congregation. One of the issues we have is other people come in and sit at the tables because they love the idea of sitting at tables rather than sitting on a chair. But that said to them, we love you and you are welcome.
Thank you, Jenny. And the final question that we're going to think about is how we might encourage people leading worship to lead with children rather than to lead for children. So again, I'd love to commend to people, the URC gives an award every month called the Lundy Award to a child or young person for playing their part in the mission of God. And this month's awardee is a lovely little chap called Noah, who was nominated for the award aged 4 for leading worship, a Zoom worship for his church. In fact, he picked the theme of Noah, his name being Noah. But anyway, the service recording is available for people to watch, and it's absolutely fantastic to watch him leading worship. And I was particularly struck by the sermon slot, which was basically him quizzing the minister about the passage. So it was the 4-year-old's questions being put to the minister, and I just thought, what an absolutely wonderful model of intergenerational preaching. So here was a child leading through his questions into an exploration of the meaning of the passage. And I absolutely loved it when he asked the minister why there were 7 colours in the rainbow, because obviously the minister had never thought about that before. And that was a wonderful moment. Jenny, I don't know if you have anything else to add to this idea of leading with children rather than just leading for them.
that whole sense of getting them involved right from the beginning. Resources, have a box of resources, have a box of material, have material, hats, wigs, things, sticks, all sorts of things, turn a table upside down, get them involved in the story. But don't only get the children involved in the story. Sometimes we do tokenism, don't we? The child reads something, we'll go, oh, well done, children. We don't applaud adults. So why, you know, if we're going to applaud the children, we applaud the adults too. There's something here about getting people involved. And if you start getting some of the adults involved as well, that's when you break down some of the barriers. That's when you break down some of the misconceptions. And, you know, I mean, I had one old chap say to me, he said, that mother needs to learn how to control that child better because she's storing up trouble for future. You know, so what we did is we got the child and we gave him a microphone because that's all he wanted. And he would walk around the church with a microphone we knew was off, but he didn't know that. And so it's about give them something. You know, if a small child comes up to me, I'll pick them up in worship. It's about, again, it's about letting them know they matter. But the resource box, the putting stuff that children can play with that ties in with the story, all of those things are saying you're welcome.
We were, if I could add something, if that's okay. We were in a church in Edinburgh and they had communion, and at the end of communion the elders were waiting to be served, and the children came forward and they served the elders communion. I was really touched and moved by this, and I thought, this is absolutely brilliant. This is saying you are as much a part of what's happening. And so I spoke to the minister afterwards and I said, so how did this start? And she said, well, it was a practical thing. It gave them something to do. You know, they'd been sitting for a long time, but to me, it spoke volumes. They had responded to the needs of the children and they had given them something really significant. And, you know, for people that were coming into the church, didn't know the setting, they could see straight away that children were included. And that was brilliant, I thought.
Lovely. Thank you, Sue. Well, we're going to have to bring this section to an end so that we can hand back over to Gill Ambrose for the second part of her keynote, which I'm sure you're all looking forward to hearing. And then there'll be another breakout session for you to have a chance to talk about that in your small groups afterwards. So over to you, Gill.
So we're looking at in the church and the way that the roots resources can help us. And I said that looking at ideas that you might use in a creche might actually be really quite helpful to us at the moment where we're having to do things at home. So let's just revisit the tiny children. So play is their world. This little boy, he'll go all over that grass and find things that interest him. He might put them in his pocket, or he might ask a grown-up to keep them, and he'll keep getting them out and explore them again and again. But of course he needs people to help that. And then the little girl that we heard about, who just thought about what happened in church and then made her own thing. She found her own things to make her own procession with. And we think about what their faith is like. It's chaotic, it's intuitive, and it's made up of all sorts of images. It's not organized in any sort of way. So then let's have a look at the resources for the week of Epiphany. Go and search the story of the wise men. So the account of the wise men involves searching. And if we just go back to the picture of the little boy on the grass, he will go and do his own searching. No one needs to say to him, Toby, go down and find the conkers or find the cobwebs. He'll do that because that's what he does. So let's have a look at ways in which we can supply those sort of activities for these children. So here we have some suggestions. Play a hide and seek game. Invite someone to volunteer and stand outside while everyone else watches you hide the image of Jesus. Then when the person comes back in, explain that they're looking for Jesus. And if the children are old enough, you can do the warm and cold thing. They might, if they're very tiny, they might need a grown-up to help them. But it's a game, it's play, and you can do it whether you're 2 or whether you're 5 or indeed whether you're 7 or whatever. And here's another one: hunt the stars. Just hide star decorations around the room, and get children to hunt for them. So you can do that at home. You could do it in a creche, clearly, but neither of these things is really impossible to do it at home. So let's have a look. And then dressing up. It would be hard to do this in church at the moment because obviously, you know, we're not allowed to share things. But you could do it at home really easily. And why not grown-ups dress up as well as children? We need to do things together. And we were talking earlier about how children can help to lead worship. And actually singing is a really good way of doing that. Somebody referred to the Peruvian Gloria, saying the children liked it. But actually children could be the people who lead the Peruvian Gloria. And then everybody else replies to them. I'm just sort of throwing that in. But we don't need adults to lead simple things like that. Children can do that perfectly well. So dressing up, we can just take time to dress up and explore and think about how we want to be dressed up and what a king might like to wear and so on. And then walking round. You can walk round your flat, you can walk round your garden, it doesn't really matter where you are. And once we've learnt the chorus of We Three Kings, then we have it forever, really. So it's a simple thing to learn. There's not a lot of it. But once you've done that, you've got it for life. And then there's the story thing, and the Roots Resources offer each week some particular resources for using with under 5s. And here's the story of the wise men laid out with the things that you would need to tell it. So some play figures, a little star, the crown, and so on. But you could do that at home. I mean, it was designed originally, this idea, for using in a creche or a little children's group. But this is something that could easily be done at home. It's the kind of thing that some people in a congregation could take those bags that we've talked about and put stuff together and take it to a family so that oh, excuse me, so that they have what they need, and then a parent or an older child can share the story. And once you've shared a story once, of course, for tiny children, they'd be happy to tell that story all week because they love the repetition. And you can leave the things out and they'll retell the story themselves whenever they want to. So it's not just something for Sunday then, it's something that might last all week or for a month or till Easter or forever. And then if we think about symbols, symbol is so important for these children. Their world is a world of symbol, actually. They develop an appreciation of symbol. They think symbolically long before they start to use verbal language. If you think of one of the very first things that a small child does once they can sit up, they point at things. They can't say the words, but they're pointing and identifying what they're seeing is an exercise in symbol, really. So within the Roots resources for this week, we have a couple of symbol type activities. So making stars sparkle. And indeed the sparkle itself is a symbol. We don't need to explain it. It's just delightful. There's a bit of a thing about glitter now, and perhaps it's not all that green. and we may need to think about that. But the shiny paper, their sequins and so on. So we don't need to explain that symbol. It just needs to be there, and we need to use it and enjoy it. And then I've mentioned this before, the Hunt the Stars. But you know, you can buy a packet of silver stars for next to nothing really, and just take it and hide it. If you're at home, you could fill the house with stars really, and you could look for them all week. And then of course, singing is foundational to worship, and I've talked about that a little bit already. One of the features of the Roots under Fives resources that's new for January and onwards is that people have written little church songs to tunes that the children may well know, and the adults will know as well. So you're not trying to teach two things at once, some words and a tune that they've never heard. So this one, Welcome Back to Church this year with the Wheels on the Bus. If you need a friend in Jesus, to the tune of If You're Happy and You Know It. So that's really easy to do. And then if we want to hand it over to the children, they will create their own actions out of that. And we can do that in a creche, obviously, but it's a thing that families can do at home. And actually, if we explain to adults that we're going to do one song a week like this, maybe in a gathering part of the service, I think that not everybody, but quite a lot of people would go with that and understand it really. And because they don't have to learn a new tune, they can cope with the words as well. And then if we look at the kind of thing that's possible within worship, within the pew, here's an idea where we introduce play into the kind of things we're doing. So the We Three Kings carol, we learn the chorus, we dress up, and we choose a person to carry a large star around the space and so on. Once somebody starts, many little children will follow. So while we sing the whole carol, or indeed while the story is being told, we've got something that little people can be doing that's very active, that is play-based, which can be great delight. And we just need to adapt it very slightly. And we've got something that's very inclusive for little people. And then some of these are things that can be done in the pew. Somebody mentioned in the chat the idea of supplying a tray of things to do that can be put where children are sitting with their parents. And this might be supremely important for this time when they're not allowed to gather in creches and children's groups. So it means somebody creating enough trays each week for a particular family. But again, we've the same kind of thing, the card star shapes and some sequins or glitter or shiny paper. The Hunt the Stars, again, a packet of silver stars with hundreds of stars in. You could just fill the church with them, and families with little children could creep around and find the stars while something is happening that they can't really engage with. That's about diversity, isn't it? And about differentiation. So maybe not every part of worship can be inclusive for everybody, but then you need to provide a different activity for some people at some times. Maybe you could send the adults to look for the stars while the children listen to a children's story, who knows? And then pray with stars. I love this idea, so that you supply some small paper stars and the resources supply a template, and then you fold in all the points into the center. And if you put those in a tray of water, they will unfold. So during a normal prayer time where maybe prayers are being intercession prayers or prayers of adoration. This is simply a distraction activity if you want to look at it in a negative sort of way, or a wonder activity if you want to look at it in a positive sort of way.
Yes, I'm going to have to cut you off there, I'm afraid.
That's fine.
But thank you so much for the richness of that content. We just want to give people an opportunity to be able to digest some of that in their small group. So we're going to send you back into your small groups now for 10 minutes. We're going to suggest that you talk about what you might take from this evening into your ministry with under fives, and particularly to think about what's your dream and what changes do you hope to make in 2021, when we hope the world will start to become a rather different place. So enjoy your conversations in your small groups, and see you back here in about 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you. Well, last night we had a look at the Roots resources in the context of preparing for using the age group of children. And tonight we'll revisit them, and Gill's already given us some examples from our resources, but this time thinking about how they help to engage of our children when they're in a church type context. Whether that's at home possibly now, or in a bubble with their parents in. So each week, the Roots resources at the beginning of the as it's presented in the magazines, there's some support for leaders in a preparation panel in blue on the top left. And this includes a consideration of how to offer the provision for under fives. And you'll find suggestions here for considering how to engage them. And particularly, you'll find something that's come up a lot tonight, actually, is a suggestion of that are directly related to what's going on in the Bible passage today. So we can see that highlighted, what to have around so that the children can get engaged. Could be used at home. You could always ask parents to have things ready if you're doing this sort of thing at home. Then another thing that we've mentioned tonight is that it's great to have things that you've got available in church. It's a list that the writers who work for us at the moment, writing all our very young children materials, have created, and will make sure that we don't go beyond these things. They're not the only things you could do. It's a wide selection. Don't feel too daunted by it. Why not try to build something like this up? And we'll be giving you a list of these things afterwards when we send you stuff. But this would be a way to ensure that the children are at the centre and they are engaged with everything. As you've seen from Gill's examples, we've got specially written activities and the story, and you can see those always with the little teddy head. They're in the third page of our 4-page magazine presentation. And they're also in the full online session, which Claire will demonstrate tomorrow night for you. They're simple, they don't require a lot of kit. The kit they require will always be from that full list. So easy to prepare. And a note as well about, as we've had a lot of conversation coming up tonight about people using our resources and engaging with everybody in full all age intergenerational worship. Well, these things again could be brought into all age worship, playing and praying with Play-Doh. Jesus is special, decorating things. Those are available for everyone, and there are lots of people would enjoy doing that. And also mentioned there's quite a lot in the adult and all age resources, specially written to include everybody. Another resource which is handy to have if parents are with children together in a pew at a table is the activity sheet with a range of activities. A colouring picture. You could use the illustration here of the candle actually as colouring, although equally you could do the activity together with parents and they could be to think around words engaged, starting with the letters in light. And in this particular example, there's a lovely little finger labyrinth, and parents and carers could work with the children and thank God for things on their journeys. That's available to download. I think that's probably about it for that particular part of our presentation.
Thank you very much, Rosie. So we're coming towards the end of our time together. I'm going to invite Jess Poole, who's the Children's Ministry Development Worker for the National Synod of Scotland in the URC, just to come and help us pause and reflect in the presence of God together as our evening draws to a close.
Thank you, Sam. We've heard a lot this evening, so let's just take a moment to centre ourselves and bring ourselves into God's presence. Our reflection this evening is going to be on Isaiah 43. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. But it's not that easy, Lord. Some of us don't want to let go of the former things. Some of us can't let go. And for some of us, times were so much better back then. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. But Lord, some of us want to let go, but others won't let us. For some of us, those were the glory days and the flowers have long since faded. And some of us have lost our way and no longer have the strength. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Some of us look at these promises like children gazing through shop windows, our noses pressed to the glass, longing and hoping, desperate for a new thing, for a way through this wilderness. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Some of us have been in this desert so long that it's starting to look like home. We've forgotten we're travellers. We swapped our tents for mobile homes and our mobile homes for bricks and mortar. Today is a new day, a voice whispers. A still small voice calls amidst the thunder. I am the God of I am, the God of now, present in the present. I will help you take the steps you need in order to move towards tomorrow. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. I am about to do a new thing. Do you see it? This year has felt like a wilderness for many of us. Everything has changed and our church lives look so different. No longer can we gather together and worship together, and we may feel lost and unsure of what to do. We often look back to how it was, longing for the days to be like that again. But God shows us glimpses of a better life to come, a different world to the one we're in now, one that is full of changes for the better, and we long for that world. We long for the days when we can be together again, when we can worship together again. We still have a way to travel before we can get there. And I wonder, while we're in this wilderness, what is God calling us to let go of? What are the old things that we need to put aside? It's difficult to let go of things. It doesn't mean that we can't remember them with fondness or speak of them, but we need to trust God and set them aside to make room for the new things He's creating for us. And as we travel in this wilderness, There may be times when we don't want to let go of some of the old ways. And there'll be days when we feel tired, lost, or alone. But God is with us. We can lean on him and rely on him. He is there with us every day through the rough and the smooth of this journey. He is with us. Today is a new day. I am the God of I am, the God of now, present in the present. I will help you take the steps you need today in order to move towards tomorrow. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. I am about to do a new thing. Do you see it? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jess, for those very inspiring words and prayer to bring our time together to an end. So it just remains for me to say some thank yous, to remind you, if you're signed up for tomorrow, that we're doing this all over again tomorrow evening, Faith with Under Fives, then tomorrow evening focusing on toddler groups, and Alison Hulse will be our keynote speaker tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing many of you then. We will be sending out an email with a link to a video of this evening's session, both a short video of just the keynote content and a longer video of the rest of the session, obviously apart from the small group times. We'll be sending that out at the beginning of next week, along with a link to a page with all the resources that people have mentioned in the chat and that contributors have mentioned as well for you. So I just need to say a huge thank you to Gill Ambrose for being with us and sharing some of her enormous experience and wisdom. Thank you to Jenny and Sue for taking part in the Q&A session, to Jess Poole for leading that very inspirational time of reflection at the end. Thank you to Rosie Nixon and Claire Williams from Roots for Churches. Thanks to the URC SIDO Plus team, my colleagues Lorraine Webb, Heather Wilkinson, and a huge thank you to AJ Mills for holding it all together on the technical side. Enjoy the rest of your evening and God bless you.